Okay guys, in this video we're going to be taking another look at Vechain to see what's been going on most recently over the last few days when it comes to the VET token. Guys, as we get into it, if you find it useful, informative, hit the like button. I really do appreciate that. And of course, if you're new and you want to stay up to date, then why not go ahead and subscribe? By subscribing, you'll be kept up to date with everything. So do make sure you hit that bell, tap on all notifications, and you won't miss a single video. Right, with that said, let's get into this. Here we can obviously see that we are on the weekly chart. So again, as we like to start from the big zoom out picture, we understand where we are going and where we are moving to. We obviously have the crash of March 2020 pushing up into wave one here, peaking out at around July, August time for Vechain. That was pretty much all-time highs were being set quite a lot around this zone. And, then we went into wave two at this point, coming down towards the end of 2020. And then obviously we've been enjoying this parabolic run to the upside during wave three. Now wave three kind of peaked out in April, and we have started to come back down into the fourth wave. Now, because wave two was flat, wave four was nice and sharp. So it seems quite painful to kind of go through wave four when wave two is as flat as it was, but ultimately this is a short-lived kind of experience and we'll be into wave five in no time at all. With this being said, obviously wave four is usually a 40% move from wave three, so whatever the move of wave three was, 40% would be taken away during the fourth wave correction, and that's roughly approximately where we are here with Vechain on this current chart. Going into wave five, this thing is putting Vechain out there towards that kind of dollar level, and we can get into that in a moment. So, ultimately it's just well worth making sure that we're aware of where we are going as we head up to that fifth wave. Obviously, there are some support lines that we might fall down to in the future. Should that happen, we have 4.6, we've got 3.4, and the worst case scenario is about 2.5 cent. Which basically means that wave 4 would have come down a very, very long way, which is unlikely. I like to just call these out just so that we're aware of where those limits are, but it's incredibly unlikely. I think if we were to have another pullback anywhere, 4.6 is the most likely scenario, but as we are reporting currently, I think things are actually performing quite well, and we have taken a few additional support lines already. So let's jump down into our daily view, where we'll just expand this up. It's where we can talk about what's been going on most recently here. So obviously we have the Fibonacci retracement tool. This actually puts this thing out there at $1.01, in line with our fifth wave expectations. We obviously have our yellow box here, guys. This is the area where we are looking to get that closed candle above. A closed candle above this yellow box area here, above the 786. Actually, if I just make that a little bit, above the 786 area, that will basically indicate that we are going into wave five in a nice, strong, bullish sentiment. So it's important that we do focus in on what is going on there. Obviously, we have a little bit of a trend line. We'll get into that on the hourly. Here you can see it quite clearly on the daily chart. Things are looking pretty good there on the daily. So when we get into the hourly, we'll show you exactly what that looks like as well. So again, always good to know where we stand from a daily point of view in line with our weekly candles and our weekly chart. We can obviously see the price action where it fell down to in these lower bounds here, finding good support at about 5.1 cent. And obviously, when we get into the hourly, we'll show you all those additional support and resistance lines that are most current and areas that we want to be really focusing in on. At the moment, we want to obviously focus on getting a closed candle above 21.5 cent. If we get up to there with a weekly closed candle above 21.5, that will put us in a very, very strong position moving further forward as Vechain starts to get some serious momentum behind it. And again, we've called out Vechain many times as it should be a top 10 cryptocurrency with everything that they're doing in the real world. There's very few projects that kind of live up to the status that Vechain has. It's definitely a serious contender to be a top 10 cryptocurrency, and I do think it's going to get there in due course. So we'll have to watch that space as well. Let's jump down into our hourly view, and this is where things start to get really interesting on our most recent kind of price action here for Vechain. So as we said, we could see that upward trend line very, very clearly on our daily chart, right? And what you can see here is actually from our low levels, we can actually see that our hourly candles have come down to this area quite significantly, but also on those daily candles, they've also been coming down, touching on this trend line consistently. Now, what is really interesting about this is there's a few additional things we want to make note of. We've been talking about 9.2 and 9.8 cent recently. These are obviously the areas that we want to get into. This area just up here, breaching the first resistance line of 9.2. We briefly kind of got up there, but we fell right back down again. And again, we're trying to come up here, but we're finding an upper level of resistance just around 9 cent and 9.2 cent. And obviously we're falling back down to our trend line of this hold, so we should be in a pretty good strong position to move up. But what is really interesting is this actually forms a triangular wedge. And what you can see here is actually as we started to move this trend line up, it meets our resistance line. And the scenario here that you're likely to see is us kind of bobbling around here, getting really, really tightly compacted before having this breakout moment and then moving to the upside. Now, obviously, that would be a very nice and neat way for that to work out. You might actually find that it actually only has a couple and it breaks out because it knows what's coming, right? So we're looking to basically move our relative strength index to the upside. My expectations are that we'll fall down again and retest this area. Basically bring in the relative strength index a little bit lower. And once that happens, that'll put us in a nice strong position to move the price of VeChain back to the upside, right? So this triangular wedge here that's forming is going to be absolutely key for helping us push past this resistance line, but it may be the catalyst that helps push VeChain above the 9.8 cent area as well. And again, when we take a look at the history here, you can see some really interesting things. Now, when we take a look where we are right now, there's also a good area of support, and this is just here, right? So we actually had this breakthrough event of this resistance line. We went up, we went too high, and we pulled back down. We're basically overbought at this point. So we had to have this correction, and it came right down. It actually went a little bit lower than the support, but obviously it was right into this area, so it had to get this reversal. It reversed out and then actually flipped and turned this into a support line. So here you can see how much this was a resistance line for us. We were battling up against this previously. This was 8.3 cent. This is we're just above it right now at 8.4. So if this continues to hold, we should start to see the VeChain price, the VET token price, actually start to increase, and then hopefully come down just as we approach this area here, moving to the upside on our upward trend line. So again, guys, when we take into consideration not only the resistance line, but also the support line with our trend line to the upside, we can actually start to see some interesting patterns form. So ultimately what we're looking for is a push to the upside, a come down and retest our upward trend line before having that kind of breakout, or again, just kind of bouncing into this area before breaking up to the upside. One thing that's really key here is that we are not going to really technically, or shouldn't technically, fall below 8.3 cent shortly, because ultimately it'll be past our trend line and we won't be invalidating our trend line, hopefully, as that has been sticking around for quite some time. So we obviously can see this on the daily chart quite consistently, but obviously as we approach this intersection here between 8.3 cent with our support line and our upward trend line, we could potentially see a bounce from this area and then go and push ourselves to the upside here. So really key to watch how this plays out in due course. Obviously, it's worth paying attention to what else is happening in the space. But as we get funneled into this area here, I am expecting a break up event, but it is going to be ultimately led by what Bitcoin does. If Bitcoin obviously doesn't have that breakup event that we're expecting up to 40K soon, then ultimately we could get wedged into here with Bitcoin potentially going the other direction, and we could have an invalidated upward trend and basically fall down lower. So again, everything is possible. I think the likelihood, though, is that we'll push to the upside, but we have to acknowledge there is also the possibility to push down to the downside depending on what Bitcoin does. Okay, and what I mean by this, if I just flick this back up into our daily chart here, just throw Bitcoin up on the chart here for a second, what you can see is obviously our expectations are that Bitcoin's going to push up towards this upper boundary here. That would take VeChain up to that next level, up towards 10 cent or so, maybe a bit above and beyond that. And then we'll have to pull back to hopefully turn and confirm some of those previous areas into, a support line rather than resistance. Now, in that journey, if Bitcoin decides this pattern isn't for it and it wants to go a different direction, then ultimately what potentially would happen to VeChain would be a very similar pattern where it would actually fall down and invalidate its structure also, right? So if we go down into a VeChain chart again, we can obviously see that upward trend line on the daily working quite well, but we put back down into our hourly here, what the expectations would be if in a scenario like that would obviously that VeChain would kind of go and bumble along with whatever Bitcoin does. But then if Bitcoin decides to invalidate its structure, then VeChain will most likely invalidate its structure as well, and would see a pull down to the downside. Now, obviously, when we see that, obviously there's good support lines. We've spoken about those previously, and the expectations are that we'll actually fall down to probably not too far. We'll find some interesting support lines on that journey. There's plenty of them on that road a little bit lower down. Bringing this back up into our daily view, you You can obviously see that there's a rock bottom zone down here, in my opinion, of about 4.6 cent. And if you were to go any lower, which is very unlikely in my opinion, you'd have 3.4. So again, it's just be mindful that there is the possibility. We are kind of testing our trend line now, so we'll be watching cautiously over that and to see how that one plays out. So really important next kind of few hours to see how these things play. If we put the volume on here, you can see what's really interesting. We have a decrease in volume. Well, we have a decrease in price and a decrease in volume. Okay, so that's actually a pretty interesting tell, right? Because what we're seeing in a sentiment point of view here is the price was pushed up, and it was pushed up with mediocre volume at this point. We can see there's loads of selling going on because of fear in the space. But this particular point here, where we had this come in and we were pulling the price down, but we were also reducing that volume. That was stabilizing our relative strength index. Now, if this continues, we'll potentially continue down here, retesting this area before having that break up to the upside. So I don't think it's going to take very long. I think the volumes have decreased quite comfortably at this point, that this is a nice, stable area for us on VeChain. So we could start to see this thing potentially move up with some good volume also moving into the upside as well. So it's always important to make sure that we're aware of the sentiment. So we will just quickly talk about what's here in the 𝗖𝗢𝗠𝗠𝗘𝗡𝗧𝗏 dashboard. So from a fear and greed index, according to the artificial intelligence, we have a C3 rating. This is exactly on par with Bitcoin at the moment. And the same with liquidity. The 𝗕𝗎𝗪 ratio is showing liquidity problems in the same way that Bitcoin is also showing liquidity problems. The Sharpe ratio, exactly the same as well, rating of D. And again, when we drop down a little bit lower, we talk about the profitability of VeChain is up at A1. So it's the absolute polar opposite of what the fear and greed index is telling us. It's the opposite of what the 𝗕𝗎𝗪 ratio or the Sharpe ratio are telling us. This is actually saying that VeChain has been an incredibly profitable project so far. And ultimately, you just have to be quite mindful of what's going on in the space, specifically around Bitcoin and the formations of the patterns on its charts. Because if we are in fact in a phase B scenario of a Wyckoff accumulation for Bitcoin, then ultimately most of these altcoins are also going to be very turbulent, and we're going to see them move in multiple different directions, and it's not going to be easy for many. With that being said, there are of course opportunities with every scenario. So if the price does fall down, there are opportunities to dollar cost average in, and likewise, whilst the price is pushing up, you're also becoming slightly wealthier if you're doing your good dollar cost average strategy. So right now for VeChain, as I said, the expectations are that we will continue this upward trend line, providing Bitcoin plays its part. We'll have that breakthrough event where I think we'll be pushing these upper boundaries of 10 cent, and hopefully we'll turn 9.8 into a good solid support zone for us. But of course, if Bitcoin is in fact following that Wyckoff accumulation that I do think it is, then ultimately do be prepared for another lower area being set for VeChain in the future, but there is still the possibility of a spring event in the phase C section of that accumulation pattern, although that is no guarantee that it may happen at all. So guys, hopefully you found this brief update on VeChain useful and informative. If you have, do go ahead and give it a like. I really appreciate that. If you're new, make sure you subscribe, hit that bell, tap on all, and you won't miss a single video, and you'll be kept well up to date. With this said, done and out of the way, guys, I hope you have a fantastic day, and I'll catch you all in the next one.